And one of the stories that you delve into care of the soul is the story of Narcissus. And I found that very interesting. I've told you that many viewers on my channel are interested in Buddhism, and the non-self or no self-teaching is very important there. But there is also big discussion about how this doctrine, if one sort of subscribes to it with blindfolds on, can lead to dissociation from oneself and repression and so on. And you speak about narcissism, and again, you talk about going into the symptom. And there's a beautiful passage you have that I just wanted to highlight, and I would love for you to comment on it. So for narcissism, you say the healing of narcissism, the fulfillment of its symptomatic hunger, is achieved by giving the ego what it needs: pleasure in accomplishment, acceptance, and some degree of recognition. Masochistic refusal of the ego's desire is no way to care for the soul. On the contrary, it is an ascetic bargain that buys a false sense of virtue at the cost of the soul's need. Motivated by thoughts of purity and self-control, a person can deny the ego all kinds of comforts, and yet narcissism may abound. An alternative approach is to hear the soul's complaint and give it love and attention where it needs it, even where we are most suspicious. The secret in healing narcissism is not to heal it at all, but to listen to it. So I would love for you to comment on it. Here is just a complete admission from my side that narcissism is something that I find again and again in my personal life, and I can see very much how spiritual pursuit can feed that sense of narcissism and disconnect me from life and from others. And so I find it very interesting, this comment that you made. Could you expand on it?
Let me say, first of all, that you are a young man, and narcissism is appropriate in your life. It's appropriate. It's a good thing. It can be overwhelming, and other people might get uncomfortable if it's too strong, for sure. If it's too strong, it could be that the roots of it are from starving of the self. Starving it. Maybe parents who don't give enough attention to the self and build up the ego of the child and think that's wrong. It's actually good. I think I have a friend in Belgium who teaches praise, especially of young people. I think it's such a wonderful thing to do, to praise young people. We need praise. We need recognition. And the person who's afraid of narcissism might not go in that direction. They may think there's something wrong with that. So I think that we have to, first of all, in order to go with the symptom, we have to appreciate it somewhat. And Narcissus, remember, the story is of a young man. A young man. We call him in our psychology a puer, using the Latin word. A puer, meaning it's a particular kind of psychology a person at any age might have. But it's a youthfulness. And that's what narcissism starts out as. In the story, Narcissus is a young man, and he's haughty, and he's distant and hard. He's Ovid, the one who wrote that story for us, calls him like marble. He's that hard. He's stony, like stone, like rock, and people can't get through to him. And one day he walks through a forest, and he comes across a pond, and he looks in the pond, which is like a reflecting pool. It's a still pond, and it's and he sees his face in the pond. And we're asked to believe in the story that he falls in love with the face that he sees there. He becomes really enamored of it. He sees, what a beautiful face, or what a wonderful person there, that he sees. And then only later he discovers that this is his own reflection. And in that moment he realizes that actually he is lovable, because he loved this face when he saw it. And so he knows in his own experience that this person is actually lovable. And at that moment, he is transformed into a flower in the story. It's a magical kind of story. He's transformed into a flower. So we're meant to understand that he has been softened, given roots, his beauty manifested, his natural self revealed, all of this in the flower. So this is what happens. And that suggests then that the narcissist, person who has the problem with narcissism, may eventually have to discover through his own experience that he is lovable. That's the story. And so I don't see, my attitude is not to be negative about narcissism. It can be hard to take, and when it's pathological, it's really bad, and it hurts the person, it hurts everyone, so you want to do something with it. When it's really bad, you want some therapy. Therapy not as curing it, it's getting rid of it, but therapy as maybe trying to get it where it can be experienced and brought into life where it isn't so harmful. Nurturing it in a way that might be useful to it, but not getting rid of it, shaping it, giving it something it needs, and making it more in line with the person's own values and not being painful. These are all things that show that it's not in a condition that's very positive right now. So our job is not to get rid of it, but to work it so that it can be more useful to the person. So what you get at the end of that is a kind of narcissism that's quite nice. Maybe I know people who are narcissistic, but it's quite wonderful, really. It's not. I love the way they love themselves. There are other people I hate the way they love themselves, but it varies. So the one person requires some therapy, but not the kind that is harsh and tries to get rid of it.
In this, the way you speak about narcissism now and also in the book, you remind me of a metaphor the Buddha uses. He criticizes those ascetics that constantly punish the body in order to overcome it, something you mentioned that you've also seen firsthand. And he gives the metaphor of a dog tied with a leash to a post. And as the dog runs around the post, pulling on its leash, it just keeps running in circles around it. And in many ways, I see that spiritual practice can become this exact same thing for the self, for the ego. And in every attempt to heroically outgrow or deny or defeat the ego, it just becomes stronger, and its pull becomes more pathological eventually. So one thing that was really interesting to me that you wrote about narcissism is that the big revelation for Narcissus comes when he sees himself in the pond and he sees himself as an object. And so he loves himself, begins to love himself as an object. And this struck me a lot. And I wonder whether now you can elaborate on what you wrote these 30 odd years ago and what you meant by this. What does it mean to see yourself and love yourself as an object?
Well, I don't mean what people might think when they hear that word. I'm treated as an object. That means you're depersonalized or dehumanized. No, not that at all. You can be an object in a way that's very human, very humane. It's just that you look at yourself less identified with yourself as something outside yourself. It's like in the story, he finds the resolution to his problem outside himself. And yet he's looking at himself. He's looking at this reflection in the water. And he doesn't even know it's him at first. So he's seeing himself more objectively and with some distance. And I think that's a very, very good thing to do. It's essential, really, not to be so personal about everything. When I was a young man, I was in a boating accident when I was 4 years old, and my grandfather saved me and died in the process. And that has had a big effect on me, and I can't really enjoy swimming. I always think I'm drowning. I'm always back in that. Really, it's almost like a return of that moment when I'm in water. I love an aspect of being in the water, but I see it as a real complex of mine. It's something that is. So what I can do is objectify it rather than identify with it so much. And I can say to myself, oh, wow, here I am trying to swim. And this fear is coming back to me. My complex is coming back to me. I want to say, what can I do for this complex right now? Is there something I could do that might help the situation? So I'm not saying, oh, poor me, I've been in this, I had this accident, now I can't swim, and all personal, and so all about the moment. I can stand back and say, yes, I've had this complex for many years now, and I've tried various ways to deal with it. And I wonder what I can do now. I'm looking at myself more objectively. I'm looking at this thing that invades me when I'm in water. It comes from nowhere. It's not mine. I haven't created it. It comes out of me. So I look at it objectively, just as Narcissus looked at himself objectively, at distance from himself. And that, I think, is very useful no matter what we do. So as a therapist, I don't talk to people so personally. I do in some ways. I make a good connection with people, but I really try to see them, to understand that they have elements in them that are not not them really. They're like invaders, or they're like presences that are not them, but are present to them, and they can deal with them. And let's both of us talk about them as though they were real things, not the person.
This is becoming only more fascinating to me, what you're talking about, because there is again this paradox between falling in love with oneself, or let's say learning to love oneself, but doing so non-personally. And if I just want to dig a bit deeper into this, because I see here a convergence between soul work and also spiritual practice. Because, for example, in mindfulness meditation, one begins to observe everything that goes through consciousness. So, for example, as I'm speaking with you now, I can be non-mindful, and I can have some anxiety about the next question, how you're feeling, how I'm feeling, some sort of nervousness and so on. And I identify with these things. Let's say, I am nervous, I am curious, I'm happy, or I'm sad. But once I become mindful, I see these as objects, occurrences within this complex of body and mind. And in this sense, this is how I understand seeing oneself as an object, sort of not claiming ownership on what arises in the body mind, but this sort of detachment, let's say, also the way you speak about it becomes combined with a feeling of great love, non-personal love. So do you see this spirit? Do you think this very spiritual practice and perspective aligns with what you're talking about?
Oh, I certainly do. Yes, I certainly do. You can. I think that first of all, I think that having a kind of meditation where you explore the elements within you now, what is dominant in you at this time of your life, that can be extremely useful in a kind of objectifying way. Not totally depersonalized, but still objective in the way you approach it. I think you understand what I'm saying there. And that kind of practice can be helpful. You have to watch out for some things. You don't want to judge yourself in all of this. Judging yourself is useless. It doesn't really help matters at all. But if you can keep these things objective, you might not be prone to judging yourself so much. but just noticing that these things are in you. And maybe some of these things you don't like and maybe other people don't like, but they're still there and you can relate to them.
Yes, and sorry to interrupt you, but then in this example that you're giving, judging oneself can also then become an object one observes within the stream of consciousness.
Yes, you can do that. It's the personalizing that causes most of the trouble, and that really is a kind of narcissism that maybe needs to be sorted through so that it doesn't interfere in that way. I think I don't know if I should say this, but I think most spiritual practitioners probably have a lot of narcissism in their practice. Just wanting to improve yourself, to get better at your meditating, to be more capable of some of the challenges that your teacher tells you about. That itself is a kind of narcissism. I don't think it's a bad thing, but the thing about these things like narcissism and these difficulties that we run into is that they are on the edge of becoming neurotic. They are on the edge of going too far. They're always on the edge. And when you have a spiritual practice, you are putting yourself in a situation in danger of having your soul react pretty strongly because you might neglect it, because you're focusing so much on the spirit. So that means, you see what I'm saying? If you neglect the soul, that's going to complain. And those complaints might infiltrate your spiritual practice. Like narcissism, that might be just part of your life and yourself, and it's working out okay. It's not interfering with your relationships and so on. But if you're in a spiritual practice where you might be trying to get away from the soul or trying to distance it might complain. I think it does complain when it is ignored. And that then might come into your practice. That's where you might find it.
Okay, so I think you're very right, or at least I agree with you strongly that the spiritual practice can be a great vehicle for this guy's narcissism. I mean, I've seen it and I've experienced it as well. I can also see how this once you realize that, it can push you to the other extreme where you say, oh, I'm just giving up with all this sort of practice and I'm just giving up with all efforts to improve myself and so on. But this isn't really a step forward. It's just lashing to the other side. So what would you advise people to do once they see that they just have this pattern of their experience and their behavior that comes again and again?
When I was a monk, we had a practice of, I forget what it was called, maybe just examination of conscience. I don't know, but it was a kind of meditating that was to focus in particular on kind of negative things that are going on inside you or in your life or in your relationships, to explore those, to examine them and see if there are some things going on that you can see that maybe you could address in your life so that they wouldn't be there. And I think that a person doing a spiritual practice could also at the same time should have a soul practice. I mean, they go together. They should be both taking place at the same time. One of those soul practices might be to either to look at yourself. It's not easy, but to look at yourself and look at yourself more psychologically at the soul level. What's going on? What are your relationships doing? What about the emotions you're experiencing as you're doing your practice? What kind of negative things might be coming through, like an extreme narcissism in your practice, or perfectionism, or other things that might weaken you as a person? So that might help. And if that doesn't help, maybe what you could do is either find a person, a friend, a spiritual friend, what they call anamkara in Ireland, a spiritual friend who guides you, helps you. If you find a a friend who you can talk about things with like that, that'd be great. If you can't, maybe get a group together where as a group you can say, in my spiritual practice, I like to describe some of the things that I find are not helping me or that as a person are interfering in some way. And at a deeper level, I want to explore my spiritual practice more deeply and not just always focus on getting better, but focus on those things that might be happening that are largely unconscious, but I can sense that they're going on, that my friends are telling me that they're complaining about who I am now. And I want to know what's happening to me because of my spiritual practice. I think that kind of thing would be very useful.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the usefulness of having some sort of community, and this is actually one of the principles you mentioned, finding somebody who can provide you with a different perspective other than your own. Yeah.
That's right. I think it's very valuable, very important. But I don't see that happening in spiritual communities much at all. I think the emphasis is much more on the individual attaining some high level of something or other. And I think it would be very good not just to have community, but that community has to be there to be able to help a person see who they are at this deeper level or at this more ordinary level at the same time, so that it isn't all just about getting higher and higher.
I can see that we're almost past the hour-and-a-half mark. But before we finish, I don't want to use too much of your time, but I wanted to touch on, again, something very important, I think, in your work, which is that you talk about sex and sexuality and how this can be integrated into a spiritual, soulful life. I think this is, again, one of the things that it can very easily be stigmatized in spiritual sort of circles. You have different vows of celibacy. You have different attacks on sensuality and on sexuality and so on. And again, in my personal life, I've seen how important it is to make some sense and build a relationship with my sexuality. And I've also seen the dangers that come once you begin to wage war with it. And so I wanted to hear how your understanding of sexuality has evolved and how you can see it being integrated in a healthy way in a wholesome life.
Well, I go back to psychological polytheism. For the Greeks, they had a god of purity, Artemis, who didn't want to have anything to do with sex or with people. Really, she stayed in the forest, and she's very tall. She represents that height, that personal height that people want to achieve in their spiritual work. But there was another goddess, Aphrodite, who all she wanted was sex. She just wanted to. She was the goddess of having a very rich sex life, and it's so now the two of them, according to in mythology, they have a hard time reconciling their two positions, but they acknowledge them. There's one play in which Aphrodite says to Artemis, "I know that you don't like what I do, what I'm involved in here, but we're sisters, and we have to understand each other. And whatever you want from this mortal human being that you are connected to right now is fine with me. The problem is if he neglects me, he's really going to be in trouble." So that's, to me, that is a citation in Greek drama that is essential to this question. That they are sisters, being pure and removed from sex, being celibate in some way, and being highly sexual and sensual in your life. That also is an equally valid way of being spiritual. This doesn't, you don't take the goddess there as being, she's not mortal. She's a goddess. This is a spiritual way to be. And some people have discovered that their sexuality becomes their spiritual path. And for a lot of people, though, it's negative. It's something that interferes, and it's something moralistically to be condemned or avoided or limited, at least in some way. I think it's much better to be polytheistic about that and say, well, I want to be a very highly spiritual person. I want to go as far as I can in my spiritual practice. But I don't have to give up my sexuality. In fact, the more sexual I become at the same time, probably the better everything is.
Yes, this is something I've discovered as well, and I can see this split in our world, because pornography is becoming a greater and greater part of just mainstream culture, and on the other side, this sort of war on sexuality and on sensuality is continuing in many religious and spiritual traditions. I myself, unfortunately, have been now I see it this way, the victim of being exposed to pornography very early in life. And so it has come with tremendous consequences. And also, I've seen this side of it in spiritual circles, where sexuality is something to be transcended completely. And so how do you see a healthy approach to sexuality for either one who is sort of sucked in by pornography culture, or by sort of the war on sensuality in spiritual circles?
One way would be, and this is a little difficult to express, but would be not to be too negative about pornography. Hillman gave a lecture once. In fact, he and I were both lecturing at a church, and I gave a lecture on the Marquis de Sade, which is quite pornographic, but he gave a lecture on pornography itself. And what we're doing, I think we both understood each other pretty well. And what we want to say is that pornography can be very extreme and have negative impact on people. But on the other hand, we know from dreams that dreams are very erotic, often very erotic and very sensual and almost pornographic, but I don't want to use that word for the dream, but I would say erotic. And it leads me to, I guess my own approach has been, both personally and professionally, has been to favor erotic imagery. That I think that the religions that provided us, both in the East and certainly in the West, with great religious pornography, not pornography, but erotic imagery.
Yeah.
And people might dismiss that or might confuse it with pornography, but it isn't. It's understanding the power of eros, the power of pleasure, the power of the body, the power of the body's potential and power to give us pleasure and interest. We might be very interested in what we see in pornography. So the pornography might be the extreme, but the erotic imagery is something that is fruitful and useful. I would recommend that people actually bring more erotic imagery into their lives and have it around and appreciate, enjoy it. My wife's a painter, and she paints a lot of nude bodies, but in the context, they're not pornography at all. We have had, when our kids were small, some of the parents asked them, didn't want to bring the kids to our house because of her paintings. They're not extreme whatsoever. Believe me, I would hardly even call them pornographic, but at all. I wouldn't call them that at all. They're erotic. So I think that distinction might help us. And I think if you could become comfortable with erotic imagery, you might be able to diminish some of your deep revulsion about pornography. You don't want it because it's not what you're looking for, and it's an aberration. but you are not being moralistic and hiding it. What you're doing is finding it. You're finding erotic imagery and seeing how valuable that can be. And then pornography is just the wrong approach. It's not some evil from hell. It's something where it's just being done in a way that's excessive. And it seems to be excessive because we are so puritanical in our approach to eroticism.
Yeah. Thank you. I've found that much of what you're saying is true. Finding a way to celebrate the erotic, bring it into the intimate relationship. Yes, finding a way to appreciate its surface, but also seeing that there's more to it than its surface. That it is actually a deep expression and dimension of experience of life. The last thing I want to ask you, you've written a book about it, and you also mention it you also speak about it in Care of the Soul, and this is depression or dark night of the soul or spiritual crisis and so on. So recently, I've had an experience like that, which was very difficult, quite hopeless in the beginning, but then by the end, I've been extremely grateful for it and for the way it has set my priorities straight and made me reconsider many important aspects of my life. And I know that many of our listeners will have gone through periods like that, but also many of them will be in such periods at the moment. So for somebody who is struggling with an extremely difficult period in their life, a loss of meaning, purpose, interest, inspiration, and motivation, what guidance would you give them?
There's so many forms of depression. It's hard to speak to it in a broad way. There are many different ways it might manifest. I'll tell you, right now, my daughter is very ill, and she's in her early 30s, and beyond belief creative person, and has so much to do and give. It's very, very difficult. I feel that kind of depression that's always there. It's something for me in relation to that. So I know I just want to say that I know a certain kind of depression. And I think that what we can do most of the time, not always, but most of the time, we can see that depression is one of the moods that is human, that comes through our life. And it may come at different times. It's never happy. That's the very meaning of it. It's not happy. It tends to linger long than you want it to. And it's also resistant to efforts to get rid of it or to change it. Even for the therapist, to me, it's one of the most difficult things to deal with. It's very difficult. But I think you start out by seeing that it's something that's natural, that depression is one of our moods. It'd be almost as if someone came to you as a therapist and said, I'm really disturbed because I'm so happy. I just can't handle it. It's one of those moods. It comes and goes. Happiness doesn't last forever. Depression usually doesn't last forever. For some people, it seems to, and it does last quite a while. But I think that's the first thing, to take it as natural and normal, and maybe use different language for it. Depression makes it sound clinical. And I do find that the antidepressive drugs do help people a little bit. They help them be able to live through their depression if it's a very deep depression. I've never spoken against antidepressive drugs because I see that they can help at a certain level. But I think they have to be accompanied by a deep soul therapy. And that's what I try to do. So depression is something that's going to happen to us. And when it comes, though it doesn't feel good, that's the nature of the thing. But as you were implying, and what Hillman says, is that depression allows us to see the world in a way we can't see it otherwise. And it gives us maybe some insights into what's happening. So I found myself as a therapist that it's not a good idea to work against your depression, to fight it. It doesn't help too much. As a therapist, it doesn't help me to try to tell people, oh, this is really a bad scene. This is really hard. You're going to get through it. But to be, not to be too light about it at all, but to, as I've been saying, to try to see it as a natural process and offer that hope for it, if there's any hope. And the other thing that I've recommended in Dark Nights of the Soul is to find different ways in your world to have this is approach to therapy in general, to find things in the world that will correspond to your depression. For example, go to a depressive play or to a depressive movie. Get into it, see what it's about, feel it at different levels, different ways. When you avoid it, it seems to get worse. When you try to do things to avoid it, try to go to a party or lift your spirits, I'm not sure that's the best way. The tradition, it's a very, very old tradition, hundreds of years old at least, says that the best way to deal with depression is to find depressive elements in your life. One place I read, simple suggestion was to go out into the world and stay in the shade. Don't go into the sunshine. Or wear a hat that's very big, has a big, broad brim, so it keeps you shaded. Identify with the depression more. Not identify so much, but have it there. Cultivate it. Cultivate the mood that's there. And
actually, I just wanted to say that sad music, beautiful sad music, has been my greatest support and therapist through difficult periods in my life. I see how very beautiful sad music just helps you go deeper, but in a way that really makes space and respects what you're going through and shows the beauty and the splendor of extremely difficult feelings and experiences. So this has been of great support to me.
One of the persons that I have studied, I won't go into the whole story of it, but when I studied a Renaissance philosopher, Marsilio Ficino, and he was really a good therapist, and he wrote a lot about depression. And when his friends were depressed, he would have them come to his home, and he would play sad music to them. He played a string instrument of some kind, and he'd play a very sad music on it. He said, "Come to me, and I will play you some depressive music." And but he did suggest in his writing, he said something that I keep in mind. And he's speaking now. He spoke astrologically about the planets. That was his main language. And he said that when you are depressed, have some solar and Venusian things around you, the sun and Venus, Aphrodite, and the sun. So have bright things, have some sunshine in your life a little bit, and have a little bit of Venusian pleasure, sensual pleasure, that sort of thing. But he says those are only to be used a little bit, not too much, because they won't take it away. But they will help you get through it, give you some relief. But he said the main thing is to go to Saturn, who is the god of depression, the planet of depression, and do things that are depressive, do things that are darker and sadder. You don't have to overwhelm yourself with that, but just like you were saying, listen to some music that is sadder, that you find sad, and allow yourself to experience that sadness in a way that is pleasurable in some ways, that is not the enemy.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas, for being here, for everything you've shared, and also for the amazing body of work you've produced and you've shared. Care of the Soul has enriched me tremendously. Sadly, in the short time I had to prepare for our conversation, that was the only book of yours I had the chance to read, but it has only inspired me to dive into other works of yours as well. I would also love to encourage our audience to explore your work, because there's a new paradigm, a new perspective that your work brings, that your work has brought me, and I feel it has the potential to greatly enrich many people. So where would you invite anybody interested to get into your work? What would you encourage them to pick up first, and where can they find it?
Well, the basic book for me is Care of the Soul, for sure. That's where the basics are, the fundamentals. But I don't know. Just pick up a book if you find it. They're around. Some are in translation, some are not, if that's an issue. And just go into that place. I can't really select any one. One of my favorites, I have to say, is one that my wife and I collaborated on, and it's called Original Self, which might be of some interest to Buddhists. I don't know. Maybe it should be Original Non-Self, but it's a book of very short pieces and some woodcuts that my wife made. She's a really fine artist. So that to me, that's little pieces to read, like one page at a time. And I think that's a beautiful book, and I recommend that. I'd also recommend, if people want to go further in this, I teach a weekly course in all this work. I call it now, I changed the name of it recently. I used to call it Soul Psychology, but now I call it Imaginal Psychology. And you can find out about that on my website, thomasmoresoul.com. Thomas More Soul. Use the word soul. There's a lot of Thomas Moores around. thomasmoresoul.com. And I have a section there called Courses, and it's all explained. And other things, other books, other things there. So I think that's all the resources I can think of at the moment.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Again, it's been a tremendous pleasure and enrichment for me. And I also hope for one day again speaking with you and delving into other aspects of your work. I thank you very much for being part of this podcast.
Well, I enjoyed it too, because I like this fact that we can take some time and really explore things. You were very good at that, to letting me speak so much. And your interest and your knowledge, that helps a great deal. And I do hope that I love very much what you say. It's music to my ears to hear you say that it's a new paradigm that might be useful to people. It's all I ask for, something like that. That would be fantastic. Especially to spiritual practitioners who I didn't get a chance to say how much I appreciate what they do and what they're doing. And I'm only offering a way that I think might make it richer and more valuable. After all, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is the effect it has had on me. So I think it would be of great value to many people. Thank you.